The city was alive with its usual rhythm, but inside the Morgan estate, time felt frozen. Thomas Morgan stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of his office, the Manhattan skyline reflecting in the glass like a distant, glittering promise. His daughter, Claire, sat in the leather armchair across the room, her gaze fixed on her knees. The silence between them wasn't the comfortable kind they'd shared on quiet Sunday mornings. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. Thomas's mind raced, and the ticking of the antique clock on the wall felt like it was mocking him, each second marking his inability to fix this. Earlier that afternoon, they had been at St. Luke's Medical Center, expecting perhaps an explanation for the fatigue and joint pain Claire had been experiencing. She'd thought it might be anemia or perhaps stress from her recent graduate program. But when Dr. Alvarez came into the room, his face carried a seriousness that Claire had never seen before. The diagnosis, an aggressive autoimmune disease, had landed in the space between them like a stone thrown into still water, rippling through every assumption she'd had about her life. She remembered her father's jaw tightening, his voice immediately switching to business mode, asking for options, names, and numbers. Dr. Alvarez had been the family physician for nearly 2 decades. He had seen Claire grow from a shy little girl into a confident, globe-trotting young woman. He knew how Thomas operated. The problems were challenges to be dismantled, solved, and conquered. But this time, he had to meet Thomas's piercing stare with honesty. "Mr. Morgan, this isn't about resources. It's about biology. There is no cure yet. Treatments can help manage symptoms, but a broken bar." He hesitated, glancing at Claire, who sat perfectly still, as though movement might make the words more real. "A broken bar, but the progression can't be stopped entirely." The ride back from the hospital had been silent. Claire sat in the back of the sleek black SUV, her fingers tracing the seams in the leather seat. She thought of the countless times money had made obstacles disappear: college tuition paid in full, internships at top firms arranged through her father's connections, a summer in Santorini after a bad breakup. Now, she was faced with something her father couldn't simply write a check to erase. Thomas had been on his phone the entire ride, calling associates, friends in high places, anyone who might know a cutting-edge specialist. She knew it was his way of coping, of refusing to accept a boundary. By the time they arrived home, the estate felt colder than usual. The staff greeted them with polite concern, but Thomas waved them off. He ushered Claire into his office, the room that had been his command center for decades, where he had closed billion-dollar deals and negotiated mergers that changed industries. He motioned for her to sit while he paced. "We'll find the best specialists in the country," he said again, more to himself than to her. "I'll pay whatever it takes. We'll go abroad if we have to. Switzerland. Singapore. Anywhere." His voice had that sharp, decisive tone that usually signaled victory was only a matter of time. Claire wanted to believe him. She wanted to cling to the certainty in his voice. But Dr. Alvarez's words kept echoing in her head, like a quiet truth she couldn't drown out. She looked at her father, a man who could bend markets and influence politicians, and she saw something she had never seen before: a flicker of helplessness. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, he was already on the phone again, instructing his assistant to clear his calendar for the next 2 weeks. Outside, the evening lights of Manhattan sparkled, indifferent to the storm that had settled over the Morgan family. The city was full of people rushing to dinners, to theaters, to late-night meetings, unaware that inside one of its most opulent homes, a father and daughter were facing a truth money couldn't bend. Thomas's voice carried across the room as he made call after call, demanding immediate consultations, sending over medical files, offering donations in exchange for urgency. Claire listened without interrupting. She knew this was how he expressed love, through action, through determination. At one point, Thomas slammed the phone down, frustration breaking through his composure. "Why does every answer sound the same?" he muttered. Claire almost smiled, a sad, small curve of her lips. "Because this isn't a problem you can buy your way out of, Dad." Her voice was gentle, not accusatory. Thomas froze, his eyes locking on hers. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. In that silence, Claire felt both the weight of his love and the limits of his reach. The night deepened, the city outside humming with life while the Morgan estate grew quieter. Dinner was untouched on the table. Claire eventually excused herself to her room, where the soft light from a bedside lamp spilled over stacks of books and a framed photo of her and her father from her college graduation. She sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process the day. Part of her wanted to cry until she fell asleep, but another part of her felt strangely calm. She realized she wasn't afraid of the diseased self, as she was afraid of how it would change the way her father saw her. Meanwhile, Thomas remained at his office, scrolling through medical journals on his tablet, reading until his vision blurred. He'd never felt powerless before, not like this. Deals had fallen apart, investments had tanked, but there had always been a next move, another angle. Now, every expert told him the same thing: slow the progression, manage the symptoms, but accept the inevitable. That word inevitably was one he had spent his whole life outrunning. Just after midnight, Thomas stood and walked to the window again. He could see the lights from the East River, the endless rows of apartments, each one holding its own private dramas. Somewhere out there, he thought, there had to be someone who knew something different, someone who had cracked the code on this disease. He refused to believe otherwise. His mind kept circling back to a thought that had driven every success he'd ever had: there's always a way. Upstairs, Claire lay awake, listening to the faint hum of the city through the open window. She thought about the places she'd been, the lavender fields in Provence, the bustling streets of Tokyo, the quiet mornings on their yacht off the coast of Maine. All of those moments had been gifts of her father's wealth, but they suddenly felt distant, almost like they belonged to someone else. What mattered now was not where she could go, but how she could live with what she had. When she finally drifted off to sleep, she dreamed of standing on a shoreline, waves washing over her feet. Her father stood behind her, holding a map, searching for a route that didn't exist. She woke before dawn, her chest heavy but her mind strangely clear. In the morning, the estate staff moved quietly, sensing the shift in the household. Thomas was already on his third cup of coffee, tie loosened, eyes red from lack of sleep. Claire walked into the kitchen, hair still damp from a shower, wearing an old sweatshirt from her college days. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat opposite him. "Dad," she began, "I need you to promise me something." He looked up, his expression wary. "Promise me you won't lose yourself trying to fix me." The words lingered in the air, a soft plea that carried more weight than anything else she had said. Thomas didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached across the table, took her hand in his, and simply nodded. It wasn't a surrender, it was an acknowledgement. A rare moment where both father and daughter understood that their love would have to exist within limits they could not change. Weeks slipped by, and Manhattan's shimmering skyline faded into a memory as Claire adjusted to the quiet rhythms of rural Vermont. The clinic sat nestled among rolling hills, its modest wooden structure almost camouflaged by the fiery reds and golds of autumn leaves. It wasn't the sort of place where high-profile patients came in. No polished marble reception areas, no art curated by renowned galleries, no staff trained to handle the media. Claire had chosen it deliberately, curious about its reputation for focusing on the whole person, not just the illness. She wanted something her father's money had never given her: authenticity. Her first days were quiet, almost too quiet. She was used to constant motion at business dinners, gallery openings, weekend trips, but here, the loudest sounds were wind in the trees and the occasional creak of the old porch boards. She spent hours in the small library, where the smell of cedar and old paper made her feel oddly at peace. The treatments were simple, carefully balanced medications, gentle physical therapy, and sessions with a counselor who spoke more about life than illness. It was nothing like the aggressive, high-cost interventions her father had tried to arrange. It was during one of those early mornings that she met Sarah Jennings. Sarah was a nurse in her mid-40s, her dark hair streaked with silver, her face warm and expressive. She moved with a calm confidence that immediately set Claire at ease. Sarah didn't ask about her last name, didn't seem impressed or even aware of who she was. She simply took Claire's vitals, asked how she was feeling, and told her a story about her dog chasing a squirrel into a pond. The laughter that followed was the first Claire had managed in weeks. Sarah became a steady presence in her days. She was practical but kind, with a knack for grounding conversations in reality without stripping away hope. She didn't sugarcoat the limitations of treatment, but she also didn't let Claire drown in worst-case scenarios. One afternoon, when Claire asked why the clinic didn't push for more experimental procedures, Sarah shrugged. "Because sometimes those treatments take away the life you're trying to save," she said. "We believe in helping people live, not just survive." That sentence stayed with Claire long after. Letters from her father arrived every few days, short notes scribbled between meetings, sometimes accompanied by books or warm sweaters. He called often, too, though his voice carried the restless energy of a man used to doing, not waiting. Each time, Claire reassured him she was fine, that she was following her treatment plan. She didn't tell him how freeing it felt to be just Claire here, not Claire Morgan, Billionaire's daughter. She knew he wouldn't understand, not yet. The autumn air was crisp the morning Thomas decided to visit without warning. His driver pulled up in front of the clinic's simple wooden porch, and for a moment, he hesitated before getting out. It felt strange to arrive somewhere without being greeted by a concierge or ushered into a private wing. He found his daughter outside, wrapped in a blanket, her hair loose, sipping tea beside Sarah. They were watching the leaves fall like slow rain, and Claire's laughter rang out as a gust of wind sent a flurry of gold and crimson swirling around them. Thomas's throat tightened. "Yoka broken bar happy," he said, his voice unsteady. He had expected to find her pale and withdrawn, maybe even angry with him for not finding a miracle. Instead, she seemed more alive than she had in months. Her cheeks were flushed from the cool air, and her eyes had a softness he hadn't seen in years. She turned to him and smiled, not the polite smile she often wore at galas, but something real. "I am," Claire said simply. "I can't control this disease, Dad. But I can choose how I live with it. Money can't buy me more time, but it can give me the chance to spend it in a way that matters." She reached for his hand, her fingers warm despite the chill in the air. "And right now, this matters." Her voice didn't waver, though Thomas could feel the weight behind each word. Her words cut deeper than any market loss or hostile takeover. Thomas had spent his life turning problems into victories, but this wasn't a fight to be won. This was about being present. He realized, with a mix of pride and sadness, that his daughter didn't need him to rescue her, she needed him to simply be there. For the first time in decades, he let go of the phone calls, the deals, the relentless chase for control. He pulled up a chair on that porch and stayed. Days turned into weeks again, and Thomas became a familiar face at the clinic. At first, he struggled with the slow pace, the absence of urgency. But gradually, he learned to appreciate the quiet mornings when Claire would join him for tea before her therapy sessions. They would talk about books, movies, even childhood memories he had nearly forgotten. Sometimes they didn't talk at all, content to just watch the wind play in the trees. Thomas also grew close to Sarah, whose frank, grounded way of speaking reminded him of the people he had known before wealth had reshaped his world. One evening, as they cleared the tea mugs from the porch, she told him, "You know, Mr. Morgan, you can't protect her from everything. But you can make sure she doesn't have to face it alone." He thought about those words long after she went inside. The more time he spent at the clinic, the more Thomas realized how much of his life he had missed in pursuit of success. Claire would point out the simplest things, the way the frost glittered on the grass in the morning, the way the smell of wood smoke curled into the air at dusk, and each time, he felt a pang of regret for all the years he had overlooked such moments. The empire he had built felt smaller here, less important than the laughter they shared over burnt toast or the quiet companionship of watching the stars. One particularly cold evening, they sat together wrapped in blankets, the night sky above them impossibly clear. "You know," Claire said, "I used to think happiness was about having everything. But now I think it's about noticing what you already have." Thomas listened, his arm around her shoulders, and realized she had found a wisdom he had never reached despite all his achievements. As winter crept in, Claire's health fluctuated, good days and bad days, but never the despair Thomas had feared. She had built a life here, one measured not by how long it lasted, but by how fully it was lived. And Thomas, for the first time in his adult life, allowed himself to slow down enough to share it with her. When the first snow fell, blanketing the hills in silence, Thomas and Claire stood at the window together. "It's beautiful," she whispered. He nodded, thinking not just of the snow, but of the fragile, precious time they had. Money could buy many things, a comfort, access, even the illusion of control, but it could not buy what mattered most. That, he realized, could only be given freely. In the end, it wasn't a cure they found in Vermont, but something far rarer, a deeper connection, a gentler pace, and the understanding that love is measured not in grand gestures, but in a willingness to sit quietly beside someone, no matter how long the road ahead may be.